Ili, yes. Yes. Yes, you're fine.
No.
Close stream.
Ako nyolla di level tseno tsa yona di level tseno di tla senya ako di nyolla ako nyolla di level tseno fe BK
I would.
ne ke re fela go nyolla di level tseno tsa mic fe ke a ukwa batho go la tla senya
log out.
ke a ukwa re ke ukwa gona
.net.
re ke ukwa gona ako bua ku wa ngutla mo lente BK
Nade.
wa ngutla mo lente
Ke nyolla wa hao.
ke ne ke hloka go aha wena ke a ukwa mo ako nyolla level tseno tsa
Okay. Yes. How are you? How are you?
ako nyollele hlentse di batla di tlasenyana
Okay.
a ke ukwa wena o hlakile a tsena
Oh.
o hlakile wa gutla re le go wa go ukwa batho jale hona le ntho ntse re wa hopola nyo
Sound ile ntse bua ka.
o bona le ntse re ako check wena mo I guess Ali. Okay. Okay.
Oh, okay, it's fine.
Okay. Really intéressant.
Hello? Hello? Sharp. It's gone. Yeah. Yes, it's gone. Something just changed. How about to teach? It's about to teach. Hanyani? The mics that are on. Someone. Is someone. Eh? Keep going, Michael. This mic is fine. How's the mic? Is our mic fine? Our mic is fine. Is the mic on the podium? There's a delay. Yes. Yes. My God, how shall I fighting?
Tlameha o tle pela haholo. Wa tsana ko re tsebang. Yeah. Wa tsana hore ka etsa bang. Re ka avoid this ka hore
Mic one. ha o hlahe kuna no teng. One, two, 1, 2. Okay, check. 1, 2.
I won't say order. We're about to start, and may I kindly ask Mema Fupu to come and open for us with a word of prayer. Thank you, Mema Fupu.
Good morning and thank you very much. May I humbly request that we stand as we do the prayer. Our God and Father, we thank you for this beautiful morning. This is the day that you have made, Lord, that we ought to rejoice and be glad in it. Loving God, we gather today here in Maseru, Lesotho, Avani, seeking for your guidance and strength. Even as we are going to discuss and deliberate, we request of your guidance, of your wisdom, of your unity. Thank you for all the speakers that are going to be sharing, and thank you for the wisdom for our understanding. We praise you and we honor you this morning. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Mema Fupu, for that prayer. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning once again. Please allow me to pay my respects to His Majesty King Lesia III and the Head of State, the Right Honorable Prime Minister and Head of Government, the Honorable President of the Senate, the Honorable Speaker of the National Assembly, the Chief Justice and Judges of the High Court, the Honorable Deputy Prime Minister, Honorable Ministers of His Majesty's Government, Honorable Members of both Houses of Parliament, Their Excellencies, Heads of Diplomatic Missions and International Organizations, Bommele Bontate, I extend my warmest greetings to each of you who have joined us today. You are most welcome this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and esteemed colleagues, welcome to the launch of Lesotho's first economic update. The economic update aims at a better understanding and assessment of Lesotho's economic performance and prospects. This first edition of the Lesotho Economic Update is designed to inform a robust policy dialogue around development challenges and opportunities for growth and poverty reduction. The World Bank's economic updates are aimed at a wide audience, including stakeholders from the government, academia, civil society, and international community. And the economic update is actually divided into two parts. Part one provides an in-depth analysis of recent economic developments, as well as an assessment of Lesotho's short and medium-term economic prospects. Part two delves into a special topic focusing on how to transform fiscal policy into an engine of inclusive growth. I would like to recognize the team that is led by Marco Fernandez, which comprises of Sonia Araujo, the senior economist, Mona Henseleteng, the country economist, Daniela Dibonkin, and Valentina Bonifaso, who are the main authors of the report. Today's program is designed for efficiency, enabling an open and constructive dialogue on the report's findings. The team will highlight the key points, followed by a panel discussion. So thank you for your attention. I look forward to a productive and enlightening as well session. May I call upon the World Bank's Country Director, Dr. Satu Kakonen, to deliver welcoming remarks. Welcome.
Honorable Dr. Madlaniane, Minister of Finance and Development Planning, Honorable Dr. Letede, Governor, Central Bank of Lesotho, Honorable Ministers, we have a number of ministers in the room this morning, esteemed guests, all the protocols observed. Good morning and very warm welcome to all of you on behalf of the World Bank to this launch of the inaugural Lesotho Economic Update. It's my great pleasure to be with you here today in this morning. And we are all very honored to have a set of ministers with us today. Thank you for gracing the room, and I hope that you will participate also in the discussion later on. So thank you very much on behalf of the World Bank. Now, as was said at the beginning, the World Bank produces across the world economic updates on countries that we are engaged with. And these updates assess the country's macroeconomic performance and medium-term economic outlook. In addition, they usually have a second part that is analyzes a very topical economic issue. And in doing so, the World Bank aims to contribute to and foster economic dialogue in member countries. And that is exactly what we hope to do also in Lesotho with this economic update. Now, the first edition, and this is the first edition of the economic update in Lesotho, it analyzes first the macroeconomic performance and macroeconomic developments in the past year. And then as a special topic, this update focuses on how to transform fiscal policy into an engine of inclusive growth. It's a topic that's very relevant today. Now, let me start with the good news. The good news is that after a decade of low and unstable growth, 2024 was an exceptional year for Lesotho. And it was exceptional as rising transfers from Southern Africa Customs Union, SACU, and water royalties created current account and fiscal surpluses. And this allowed for renewed impetus in public investment. In this year, the second phase of the Lesotho Highlands Water Project is expected to give a temporary surge in economic activity. But let me then turn to the not so good news. And the not so good news is that higher growth in 2024 will not last unless reforms are taken to incentivize private sector activity and to improve effectiveness of fiscal policy. SACU revenues are projected to decline over time, and the economic boost from the Highlands Water Project will pass. Above all, we are convening here today as the recent tariffs imposed by the US government will have been now imposed and will be soon implemented. If implemented, they will have a significant adverse impact on Lesotho's economy and Lesotho's prospects for economic growth. There are also other uncertainties on the horizon, including what is going to happen with the Millennium Challenge Corporation operations in Lesotho. And all of these are creating dark clouds for the economic outlook. I need to mention in this context that the report that we are releasing or launching today was prepared, and it was also printed before the latest tariffs were announced. So as a result, the macroeconomic outlook, the medium term, the forward-looking medium-term economic framework is already outdated. And therefore, we are not talking today about the macro numbers going forward, only backwards, because we are at the moment doing the analysis on a revised numbers, which, by the way, don't look that good, but we are releasing those only next week. But what this all means is that without reforms, job creation in Lesotho will remain low, and we will not see progress in poverty reduction. So therefore, reforms are more pertinent now than ever, and the time to act is now. There's no time to waste. Lesotho currently benefits from high SACU revenues and increased water royalties from South Africa. And together, and this was before the current announcement of tariffs, they were projected to increase to 31% of GDP, and this compares to 18% in 2022. So this, if it happens, this would be a massive temporary revenue windfall. And spending such a windfall wisely and not wasting it will be critical. Because whether these revenues will have a positive impact on Lesotho and boost Lesotho's economic development and growth depends on how they are spent. Now, this economic update recommends using these resources, if they come, to rebuild fiscal buffers and to establish a stabilization fund to enhance Lesotho's resilience to shocks and to smooth public spending over good and bad years. It would be important to unlink annual public spending from annual SACU revenues, since these revenues have created macroeconomic stability and undermined economic growth in the past. Now, in parallel, adapting and implementing fiscal rules would help contain debt and guide fiscal policy. Such rules would help with the allocation of spending into those areas that are more likely to deliver stronger growth over time, such as public investment and education. And in that context, improving public investment and financial management, as well as implementing the Public Procurement Act, would be essential to ensure that investments deliver and public money is spent efficiently. So fiscal reforms at this moment are important, very important for Lesotho. This report also calls for ambitious reforms to promote private sector-led growth and export-oriented investments to enhance job creation in Lesotho. And under the current circumstances, Lesotho would need to look in the further export markets. Focusing on cost-free reforms, such as reducing administrative costs and easing regulatory barriers to business, would boost private sector activity and growth. They would also enhance Lesotho's reputation as a friendly business destination and would be good for investment and trade. And continuing to make progress on trade facilitation, connectivity, and improving access to credit would be also important at this point in time. Now, in parallel, using resources to advance education would be smart economic policy. In particular, expanding access to early childhood education, improving teacher training and deployment, reducing very high dropout rates from school, and investing in school facilities would improve equality of opportunity and promote inclusive growth. Now, implementing all these reforms would require a concerted effort from the government. But unfortunately, the reforms are necessary to achieve a more prosperous future for the Basotho. Now, growth does not happen, it doesn't just happen in any country in the world. It is not automatic. It requires hard work, and now is the time for hard work. We hope that you find this economic update helpful and that it will contribute to a debate in Lesotho about fiscal policy and how to transfer fiscal policy into an engine of growth. All of us, my colleagues and me in the World Bank, we are ready to continue supporting Lesotho in that effort. And in particular, we are ready to support Lesotho at these difficult times. We are not leaving our friends behind when the times get tough. So thank you for joining us. Thank you. Thank you for joining us this morning, and I hope that you will find this engagement useful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Satu. At this time, I would like to call upon the Governor of the Central Bank of Lesotho, Dr. Emmanuel Letete, to deliver some remarks. Thank you, Ndati.
Thank you very much, Madam Kwata, my former lecturer. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to say a few words in this gathering. May I kindly allow me to give my highest extreme regard to His Majesty King Elizabeth III, the ministers present here with us, in particular the minister in Prime Minister's office, who is here with us, and joined next to him by the Minister of Law. I hope I have not made a mistake, because things changed quickly in the world. The Minister of Finance and all other ministers, dignitaries, Minister of Public Works, I couldn't see, he's here. Minister of Trade is here also. The Minister of Agriculture also is here. And thank you so much. All dignitaries, the head of embassies, the UN, and the MCC representative is also here. And of course, everyone else, and having said so, allow me to say all protocol observed. Ladies and gentlemen, we are being asked to make this talk during a very difficult time. And of course, when we were planning for this meeting, things were not the same as they are today. 2 days ago, we were hit by the 50% so-called tariff, calculated the way it is calculated on its own way. We don't do that in economics, we don't calculate that way. But unfortunately, we have been hit by that 50% tariff. And that really has made us now to think differently again, and to think how this economy can now be rescued in terms of this difficult time. I will first of all give a comment on that the increased tariffs in the US have given huge uncertainty to everyone across the globe. The uncertainty that we had never perhaps been subjected to except for in the early 1930s. Perhaps that was a kind of uncertainty that today we are faced with in the world. This uncertainty is going to hit very hard on us as Lesotho, given the amount of exports that we were sending to the US and the amount of jobs that had been created since the early 90s in the textile industry. And unfortunately, these jobs now are in the balance, they're hanging in balance. And that is a very difficult moment for us. And of course, we know the topic of today, but I think there are more other urgent issues now that we are confronted with. What we see of this policy decision and this uncertainty is fueling the market volatility. The US global market are actually taking a knockdown, and this will potentially lead again to a global recession. And of course, trade wars have started, and as you are all aware, China has also filed a retaliation tariff as well, and other countries will do the same way. And indeed, this is a very difficult moment that will definitely lead us into trade wars. Unfortunately, as small countries, we can never retaliate. We are so small country that you can never stand up tomorrow morning and say you are also retaliating. You can never do that. You are hard hit, and then you are crushed out completely out of the global trading system. But what is left on us is really to see how we maneuver this difficult terrain and what are the new opportunities by which we can be able to really export. We see this uncertainty again going to lead in the medium term to persistent inflation in the US economy. Yes, there are arguments from others that argue that there can be inflation, but from central bank side, we believe that this eventually will lead to increasing inflation in the US economy. While at the same time, we from the governor side are afraid now, we are now panicking, all of us, that we are going to have liquidity shortages in the system. We had been used to a system that had become so comfortable over 40, 50 years, where the US dollar had been utilized as a currency of settlement. Today, all governors are now panicking that with this amount of tariffs and reduction in exports to the US and so on and so forth, the possibility of having US dollar shortages is very high. And if that happens and trade can no longer flow the way it was flowing, countries are definitely going to take a knock in their crop levels. Countries are definitely going to take a knock in the amount of crop that they realize every day and the number of jobs that they're able to create, in particular, the developing countries as well. So it is a very difficult time to us. And if in the medium to long term this happens in the US, the expectation is that the dollar could strengthen while the rand or the low side continues depreciating. With that depreciation, there's a premium that you pay with any depreciation of a currency, including your debt levels that start going up. And these are our greatest fears where they are now. I think today the low to rand to dollar is exchanging above 19. And clearly you already see that we are now getting into a more depreciated levels of currency. And that comes with a premium to pay at the end of the day. So clearly these issues are really difficult for everyone in our context. We, unfortunately, as an economy, we are circumscribed entirely, as you know, by South Africa, which of course has very clear trading links with Lesotho. whatever happens, South African economy translate one-to-one into Lesotho as well. And South Africa has been really targeted now in this context again as one of those economies that seems that there are discussions that even sanctions must be imposed on South Africa. That imposition of sanctions on South African economy again, is this going to have implications on us as well, including on the amount of circle receipts that we get? The circle receipts that today we are planning, perhaps how they could be used to stimulate crop, but in the next 1 or 2 years, that is going to change drastically given the current environment where we are. So the South Africa, if this fight continues exactly on South African context, and capital flows out of South Africa as the intent is, and collapse of South African economy, for other reasons beyond economic reasons sometimes, that is going to affect Lesotho squarely. And I think we need to think, therefore, from that context, beyond the tariff, and apply some political economy understanding of what is happening in the world. And that itself will help us really make appropriate intervention as we move into the future. Let me just come to the topic under discussion today again, having laid this bit of foundation. The city economy has not been growing very well at a rate at which we would have loved it to be. It is being growing at around 2.3%, 1.4%, 1.5% when we net out projects. In actual fact, if we take out the impact of government projects entirely, the economy is growing at around 1%, and that is not a healthy growth. Net out government projects, the economy grows at around 1%, and that absolutely is not the growth that you would really want for this economy that is facing around 30% unemployment. So there's something that we are not getting right here entirely, and that is the private sector. How then do we ensure that the private sector can be able to lead growth in the economy? A number of issues are at play. We have discussed these issues over 40 years, over 20 years, over 10 years, over 5 years, but a number of issues are at play, and some of these issues really are coming directly from us as technocrats in government. Some of these issues are coming squarely from the private sector itself. How do we then come together to ensure that we solve these issues in the context of reforms? On the government side, the issue of efficiency by which we deliver the public goods which are complementary to the private sector is very critical, and that requires reforms. In actual fact, if we look at the efficiency of capital in Lesotho, you get around 5% instead of 10%. So that means around for every load you spend, the return is around 5%, and that's too low. And in actual fact, if that is the case, then we have a longer term problem because the economy has to grow at least by 6 or 7% to make meaningful impact in terms of poverty reduction, in terms of job creation. So really, I think we are aware to a large extent of those constraints to growth, but I think the time to deal with those is now. Perhaps it is the right time that we need to take far-reaching reforms and implement them, as the first speaker has really indicated, and improve that efficiency in the use of capital. If we can miss this opportunity, I don't know if there's going to be any other. It is a crisis, but it's worth using that crisis for the betterment of Lesotho. And I have argued that we should not be panicking. Rather, we should stay fast and see what are the opportunities in the context of these challenges that we are facing today. Can we utilize those opportunities? Can we run over all the reforms which are necessary in terms of transforming this economy in order to deliver inclusive growth? And I think we can be able to do that. On the private sector issues, again, there is really challenges. I will really say it, and I wish the private sector people are also here. The pace at which they deliver is also in doubt. And that to me is not the government. If I give you an opportunity to construct a road, now you take 10 years to construct that road, and the Chinese company take 2 months, surely I would tell you that I'd rather go with Chinese company. To be honest, And I know it's very painful to do so, but at the same time, I want delivery because I don't have time in office. I want growth, I want this. Otherwise, I'm kicked out of office immediately. So I mean, the private sector has got now to talk itself and advise itself to say, how best do we deliver? Secondly, on the private sector side again, there are issues that we can never deny every time and again, where the private sector takes advantage of government every time. Private sector, it is not, if we need meaningful growth and inclusive growth, it is not for you to take advantage of government to say, because I'm supplying the government, I'm going to charge them double or so on prices and so on and so on. This issue, we have been seeing it so many times. And there is the third issue, which we have to squarely talk to each other about from the private sector side and the judiciary, where people sometimes finance things or they supply government for things that they have not delivered to, yet they make claims to government. They say, okay, where is this thing that you have delivered? There's nothing when you look at it entirely. But the money is now sieving through the central banking and so on and so forth. That to me is very painful, and we need to look at ourselves from the private sector side and say, look, truly speaking, what is it that I have to claim for? What is it that I have not to claim for? So there are reforms needed on the private sector side. There are reforms needed on the government, and I don't think we should only concentrate on the government side, but rather take the whole ecosystem. Even in the judiciary side, a number of reforms, I'm sitting in the central bank and I'm regulating a number of banks who have extended credit to a number of private sector agents. Now, the rate at which you are able to really adjudicate on commercial cases, it leaves a lot to be answered. And I know lawyers will tell me that you are a governor, you cannot intervene on this matter. You stay away. It is our jurisdiction. I know it's our jurisdiction, but at the end of the day, it's affecting my sector entirely. It's affecting the loans extended to the private sector. It's affecting everyone. And these issues are never talked about so that we can promote that which I call efficiency if we meaningfully want to see growth in the economy. Let me pass that point, go to the next point. In terms of balance of payment side, the economy has been realizing meaningful surpluses lately because of fiscal consolidation that is taking place and increased revenues from SACU as well as from the water royalties. So that has given a slightly better position. But the problem is here, how long can we sustain that position? I look at numbers and I said, this is just like a wind flowing. You never know where it's going to disappear. It's a wind just flowing over. You don't know. When you wake up tomorrow, that wind is gone, given the challenges we are faced with today. So I think even if we use fiscal policy to stimulate growth, we need to be very careful because the wind will flow, and tomorrow we'll never see whatever happened with that wind. So I take them as a windfall. Personally, that must be used with absolutely prudency, as much as possible to avoid the strong winds which I see coming ahead of us. In the next 2-3 years, we do not know what winds are going to flow over the kingdom of Lesotho. The third point is access to credit. Yes, there has been challenges on our financial intermediation. But these challenges of financial intermediation are underpinned entirely by the reforms which are needed in the economy. We have put to the banks a certain limit on which they should extend credit, say 60% of deposit, 70% as a directive. But the next morning they also come and say, but Honorable Governor, we don't see the viable projects. We don't see this, we don't see that. And sometimes really, these are the issues that we have to deal with squarely to be able to transform the economy. So the access to credit has been increasing very slowly at a very slow margins, particularly particular identified sectors, but that has not made any meaningful impact. Banks today are more than willing to say, can we extend credit? But let's also remember that banks will always do that in a short-term space. It is not their space to do long-term lending. Otherwise, they have what they call a mismatch in their balance sheet. So clearly, we would like to have other interventions in the economy, which of course the last year budget provided for a little intervention that has to be safeguarded in terms of really access to credit, again, to women, to entrepreneurs, and other projects from the Deshava side, from World Bank side, which are also trying to work on the issue of credit. But that is not enough. Can we have, in the medium to long term, a development finance institute that can be able to real access? But that also itself is risky. It is risky if you are working in an economy where people cannot be trusted, where people cannot be willing to pay back that which they were lent. And that is very risky. So we are treating with caution where we say, yes, let's have development finance institute, but at the same time, let us not throw money into the donga. Let's ensure that people themselves are committed for us to transform this economy to pay back that is due to them. So I think this is where we are grappling, but the government, I think, will put in place some safeguards in order to ensure that such monies, because this is public money, it's not government money. And I know there's this misinterpretation that the money is for government, so because it's government money, we don't have to pay it back. And that is misinterpreted. This is public money. These are public resources, and the word public is different from government. So these are public resources. It's my money, it's your money, that we are extending to him to go for investment, to create jobs. And if, as a private sector man, you think it's a government money, I cannot be able to pay it back. We are actually not paying all of us back. That's what it means. So I think we need that trustworthiness again. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, there is a discussion going to take place on these reforms and other things, and allow me not to bore you with my own thinking and my own feelings on this matter, but just to conclude to say, look, we are in a very difficult environment. Let's think a little bit deeper than what we've been thinking. Let's take into account the political economy into the whole umbrella, because the political economy arguments are also very fundamental. What is it that the US want? What is it that? Is it the war? Is it Israel? Is it this? And build a story around that, and clearly that can be able to give us a better trajectory moving forward. Again, let's look back again and holistically look at these reforms again and really commit ourselves to implementing this reform with agency, because I don't think there's any time than now by which all the reforms should be implemented, and give ourselves the time-bound plans that by this time this will be done. And we have to really ask the technocrats in the government as well, in the central bank and everywhere, that we work on efficiency, because without that efficiency, believe it or not, we are never going to deliver this economy out of the crisis it is facing today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ndade Governor. May I call upon the Minister of Finance and Development Planning, Honorable Dr. Ritudisitwe Matlanyane, to deliver a keynote address. You are welcome, Mayor.
Melbourne, good morning. I don't know what's left to say after the governor has said what he has said. I spent the weekend probably binging too much on the news, so my spirit is dampened. this morning, but I'm glad he said all the things that I would have said. But even with that, I must thank you for attending this very important function this morning. Let me start by aligning myself with the protocol. I believe that's okay. It has been read by 3 people or 2 people now. I think it has been heard well. So all protocol observed. I'm much more particularly impressed and thankful that we have all our development partners here, signifying that you're still with us. That says a lot to me. We are not alone, and we can never be alone. No country will survive on its own. That is a condition that is with us. No one can be on their own, no matter how strong they are or how weak they are. And that is a clear message this morning to me that we are not alone. So I thank you for being here. Bomel Bontate, you will recall that in 2023, I think it was July, we launched the World Bank Country Partnership Framework, which would drive us from 2024 to 2028. It is a strategic document that we use with the World Bank to chart our path for a period of 5 years, very much aligned with our NSDP, which is our blueprint for development in this country. Amongst other things, or at least 3 pillars were in it, or 2 pillars. It included the need for strengthening collaboration with development partners and broader stakeholder groups such as yourselves, academia, youth groups, and civil society. It also outlined utilization of deeper analysis to inform programming for impact. We called upon the private sector to play a very meaningful role in the development of this economy. Some things remain the same, some things don't. A lot has changed since 2023. It's hardly 18 months, or at least we are at 18 months now, since it was July. Thereabout. Yeah. So a lot has changed. It has been an eventful 18 months. Topping it all was the events of last week, of course, which we are still trying to assimilate, to digest, and to sort of plan where our next step will be, so that we go in the right direction. In this regard, it gives me pleasure that this morning, again, we are launching the first ever Lesotho Economic Update report. This report is meant to help us, again, to review where we are and how we can move forward with the 2 main objectives that we want to achieve, which is growth and employment, to address the maladies that have been bedeviling this economy. So it stresses the need for effective fiscal and public investment management reforms to address our challenges. And the simple reason is that the most potent policy that we have in this economy is fiscal policy. It is the one that we need to leverage on and get most out of. You talk about monetary policy, we are compromised in some way because we are in a monetary union. You talk about trade policy, we are compromised because we are in a customs union. So we don't have full control over those policies. But on fiscal policy, the only constraint that we have is our size and therefore the fiscal space that we have. But also it's also an opportunity for us to see how best we can use that fiscal space that we have. And we can be as innovative as we can be to make it with the space that we have. So this report, it also highlights the critical role of fiscal policy in mitigating macroeconomic volatility. and fostering effective policy. So it emphasizes the effective fiscal management, that effective fiscal management is key to addressing macroeconomic volatility. Therefore, it is critical to strengthen fiscal discipline as much as we strengthen efficient public investment. With the resources that we have to make the most of them. While we talk about fiscal policy, we should not forget that when we talk about growth, we're talking about private sector-led growth. Fiscal policy can only go to the extent of formulating policy and readying the environment for the private sector to play. The private sector has to play, and Dr. Letete, thank you for saying so much about the private sector. Things that we talk about every day, things that are not happening. And I think sometimes it takes for us, Basotho, about facts, about the truth. We've been saying private sector is not coming on board. You talk to private sector says government is not doing enough. I try to find out what is it that we're not doing enough. And what made private sector in other countries to be effective and so much agile and active? Is it because they leaned on government? No. It's not because they leaned on government. Sometimes it takes for you, government sector, private sector and business is about risk management. It's about risks. It's a risky environment. You got to be agile and move, if possible, ahead of government itself. Don't wait for government. We're running out of time. With all that is happening around us, we are running out of time. And no one and nobody, none of us will be able to pick us up from where we will land if we leave matters at this time. I don't care who it is, but no genius will be able to pick us up from where we are. So everything is in our hands. So going back to the history, I'm not going to talk about focus. It's meaningless to talk about focus in such a volatile environment right now. Things are changing rapidly. You can't even focus beyond your nose. So, but going backwards, between 2016 and 2020, the years 2017 to 2019, we contracted for 3 consecutive years. In recent years, we have picked up a little. We have experienced modest recovery. However, the recovery has been very much insufficient to reverse the damage that was done at that time. And Lesotho, like other economies in the region, is confronted with a myriad shocks, a myriad constellation of things that are changing in our operating environment. Inflationary pressures, increasing oil prices, geopolitical conflicts, lingering spillovers of COVID-19, and of course of the 2008 financial crisis are still there. Climate change is with us, and many other things, gender-based violence, social maladies, everything that is going wrong, even in society. But of course, you could say those are probably symptoms of an economy that is not performing very well. The unfortunate thing is that we thought this was us, but it turns out now it's the world. It's global, which makes the picture much more complicated than it would otherwise be. So all these downside risks impact negatively on our economy. While we're trying so much to do what we can to reinvigorate the economy, there seems to be a lot of other things that come in to destabilize the environment and therefore make it very hazy for us to see beyond the wall. So we are now in an environment where public and foreign investments are at risk. Weakened export competitiveness is with us, and our contribution to the growth of, the contribution to growth is diminishing. What we need to do is basically what Dr. Letiti says. As a small economy, you cannot even start thinking about addressing what is happening in the world right now. All you can do is focus on yourself, focus on what we can do to get ourselves out of here. And it needs a new mindset. It needs new thinking altogether. How do we de-risk ourselves from the global economy, but also stay part of that global economy? How do we get to have multilateralism encouraged? How do we make sure that as a global community that the gains that have been made in globalization are not reversed? I don't think we need to rewrite economic texts. They are written, they are there, they have been there forever. What we are experiencing is no different, maybe slightly, but no different from what was experienced between 1929 and 1945, the Second World War, which led to the birth of the Bretton Woods institutions that we celebrated 80 years of in Washington last year. Only after the celebration, this happens. And by the way, it wasn't just 80 years that we celebrated. We also celebrated the passage of the Pact for the Future at the UN, a pact that says we need a new global financial architecture. We need to fix the financial architecture. We need to fix we need to move to a new global order, economic order, that takes into account technology and all other things. That takes into account that we have left developing countries behind. How do we make it such that there is inclusivity in it? We all agreed, the US being in the front. And yes, we intend to move forward with it as the global community. And I believe the US wants that as well. It just happens that, as it were, that something happened that as a global community, we should not feel intimidated by. We should not go on panic. We still want to move forward. What happened is reversing, is moving, but in reverse. And that's not where we want to go. So the private sector still needs to be in the driver's seat. We still need to think about how we get to associate and collaborate with other countries in a much more meaningful way. As smaller economies, I would discourage that we become inward-looking. Yes, you can be inward-looking in terms of developing your supply chains and your supply sector and all the things that you want to do, but inward-looking policies will not take this global economy anywhere. We need to be able to strive for that multilateralism and work together as global economies. So for that, we call on the private sector to play a meaningful role. In whatever you do, play a meaningful role. Risks will be there, but think about ways of de-risking business. It's not entirely the role of government to de-risk business. There are many ways of de-risking business. And go ahead. The governor has spoken about something that is close to my heart, access to credit. We have done so much in access to credit, access to financing, but it's not working for us. And the simple fact is that there will not be any meaningful progress made in access to credit in an environment where contracts are not enforced. Once there's no enforcement of contracts, forget about it. People default, and then they come back and say they need access to finance. I know many of our private sector who have done that. Government, with public funds, has come in to support the private sector. And the private sector just goes by and says, unfortunately the business didn't go well. And they don't even mind to repay their loans. So these are some of the things that need to be addressed. There are conversations that we must have as a society for us to be able to walk this journey together. We need to be an export-oriented economy. We need to develop our industries. We need to develop our infrastructure and improving the business environment as we are doing. But we need short-term, medium-term, and long-term solutions. We need dialogues with our partners. And I'm happy because they are here. It means for us, doors are open to speak to them. Doors are open for us to have conversations, and doors are open for us to forge a new direction of where Lesotho is going and where this community should be in future. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I have so much that I could say, so much, but there is no time. The time for today is for us to look into this document that charts our way forward and see what it is that we can do with the only policy that is much more powerful in this economy, which is fiscal policy. And while we do much also on trade and on monetary policy, but we need to leverage much more on this one. So we stand at a critical juncture in our economic journey. The opportunities that are provided by the World Bank through the partnership framework, as well as our NSDP and the other frameworks that we have with other development partners, are sufficient if we just put our minds into what should be done. And not only put our minds, actually be active and do it. The important thing is doing it. And then we will see the way forward. It's very painful to see us working hard, moving from a trench, and just when you're just about to land on top, something else brings you down. And it's not a position that I'm willing to accept that easily. We need to work hard. We need to move, to forge our way forward. And we can. We have the potential to do so. And we will do so with you, the private sector, with you, the public sector, through policy and other things. So we need to hold our hands and move forward. The development partners are here. We will not always rely on them, but they're here to support us. We shouldn't be sleeping on them. When somebody supports you, they say, you can put your head on my chest, but don't sleep on it. You become heavy, for heaven's sake. That's it. You become too heavy for that person. You can just rest for a little while, the storm goes, but you need to move. And we have been resting for how many? We're close to 60 years now. 58 years. Shame on us. Shame on us. Let's make their time worthwhile. They are here to support us, not to carry us. It's different. So, Bomel Bondade, let us join hands together to map a way forward in achieving economic recovery. And as I conclude, I want to say that I would like to thank all our development partners once again for all the efforts, for all the messages of encouragement, even at difficult times, for all your contributions and inputs into what we can do. You've just been wonderful. And I truly would like to thank you for that. And I also want to thank, in particular, the World Bank Group for this, what we're doing today, the genuine partnership that we see. And I also want to say thank you and appreciate the partnership of all the partners that are in here, the strong partnership that has prevailed and is continuing, helps us to move forward. We need our youth, we need our civil society, we need development partners, we need government, we need the private sector, we need you all to do your part. If there's anyone who really is thinking the same way that we were thinking before last week, I'd really like you to see me. It's not business as usual. You can't be thinking the same way that you were thinking the week before last. You can't. Otherwise, you're not with us. So let's rethink. Let's discuss how we're going to do things differently, and bring out the leader in all of us. There's no one leader that will make you converge. But I know we have leaders in here who are holding very important positions, in key strategic positions, and in areas where we can make Lesotho a better place. And I want to see those leadership skills coming out. Before Kipota, let me say I really thank you. I really thank you for being here this morning. Again, it demonstrates the partnership that we have with you all, and I believe we will make Lesotho great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor. At this point, we are going to have a presentation on the Lesotho Economic Update, the core of our business. So I would like to call upon Dr. Monaheng to deliver the presentation on the state of the economy. Dr. Sliteng, you're welcome.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this occasion. It's my privilege to present the state of the economy. I will touch upon recent economic developments and then touch a little bit on the outlook, even though I will not talk about the numbers, as we have been highlighted that the macroeconomic outlook is very fragile at the moment. So, but of course, we'll talk about the risks that we are foreseeing. So, I'll present the first part, and my colleague Sonia will present the second part on how to transform fiscal policy into an engine for inclusive growth. The first presentation will be just to give you a sense of where we are. If you look on the left panel, you observe that we are recovering, as the governor mentioned. The economy is recovering from the COVID pandemic, but we are still not above our growth potential. So we are still not having recovered as yet. So if you take the averages for, say, 2010 up to 2013, you observe that on average, the economic growth was around 4.5% on average. And then if you take the recent years, the average is around 2.2%. So meaning that we are recovering, but we are still not there yet. So obviously we are recovering because of some of the factors, such as the ongoing Lesotho Highlands Water Project Phase 2, among other things, leading to this positive growth in recent years. When you compare Lesotho with its peers, the low middle income countries, you see that the real GDP per capita gap is widening between Lesotho and its peers, which is not actually a desirable condition. What has been driving this growth in recent years? Lesotho Highlands Water Project, obviously finance and insurance and other things that are related to the big project. But you observe that some other sectors are not performing well. You look at manufacturing, you look at mining and quarrying, they are not performing well because of low demand globally, as well as, you know, that currently lab-grown diamonds are more preferred than our naturally extracted diamonds. So also diamond prices have played a role globally. So this shows that some of the sectors are not performing well, even though some sectors are performing well in recent times. In terms of employment, we have observed that in the early 2019 or so, the largest employer in the country was basically manufacturing. But this has since shifted in recent times. The government has taken over, which is not desirable because we want to shift from public sector-led growth into private sector-led growth, as the minister has indicated. Comparing the country with its peers in terms of employment and labor force participation, if you look at sub-Saharan Africa and compare it with Lesotho, Lesotho has the highest unemployment rate, but also the labor participation is very low. So this is also a negative signal. We have been observing that remittances play a very significant role in terms of household standards of living in the country because of migrant mine workers as well as other workers in the Republic of South Africa, among other things. They are averaging around 20% of GDP. So should there be anything that affects remittances, obviously this will have dire consequences into our economy. You comparing these remittances with the rest of the other peers, you may observe that Lesotho, in terms of remittances, is the highest. Now moving on to the cost of living. Luckily, the cost of living has been moderating in recent times. Of course, this moves in line with South Africa because of the CMA agreement that we have in the region. The main contributors, obviously, food and non-alcoholic beverages continue to be the main drivers of the cost of living. But as the minister indicated, of course, when we go to the outlook, we observe that there are certain risks that pertains. The external sector, in recent times, we've been in good shape because of high SACCO revenues, water royalties, as well as remittances from abroad. That's why we are realizing a current account surplus in 2024. This is the first time since 17 years, which is quite good, meaning that we are in good position at the moment, just before what happened last week. The reserves remain adequate at above 4.5 months of IPOS cover. This is the rule of thumb that we use to assess the reserve adequacy for maintenance of the exchange rate peg. Our exports, or Lesotho exports, are mainly diamonds to European area, especially Belgium, whereby they are being auctioned. Then we have textiles to South Africa as well as to the US. Then, of course, water exports are becoming significant as well. So most of our exports are destined to Africa, mainly South Africa, especially the textiles. And a huge chunk of this is also destined to America, North America. So whatever happens in America is going to affect that significantly. Of course, our diamonds are destined to European area, also due to slow global demand that affects us as well negatively. On the fiscal policy, as the minister indicated, this year we are in good shape, just before last week. We have, I'm not continue. Yes, so we have been observing fiscal surplus since 2023 due to high SACCO revenues, high water royalties after the negotiations between Lesotho and South Africa of the contract between, the water exports. So you observe that we are even in a much better position as compared to 2012 and 2014. So the point is, how are we going to make sure that we use this revenue efficiently and effectively? Now, on the debt side, The most important thing to realize is that obviously we contract most of our debt externally, but we have observed a trend whereby domestic debt is now increasing. So this also attracts more interest payments domestically. In terms of arrears, we are in good shape. We have surpluses. We are paying out arrears, but it seems some arrears keep on re-emerging. So that's why we have to make sure that at least we have fiscal policies that are able to curb the re-emergence of arrears. The outlook, I'm not going to talk about the numbers, but I think in the report that you have there, we had numbers prior to the Liberation Day. So we had the numbers whereby we anticipated our economy to be driven by phase 2 of the Lesotho Highlands Water Project. We expected inflation to moderate. We also expected to keep having fiscal surpluses in the medium run. The current account also, we were in surpluses, but going forward we expect deficits because of imports associated with the big project, the Pudihari. So what happened overnight is that we are going to have direct impact and indirect impact caused by a lot of uncertainties. The economy is very fragile at the moment globally. We are not sure what to expect the following day. So the direct impact is going to come from our exports destined to the US. Obviously, it is going to have an impact on investment as well as economic growth. We are going to, we anticipate that there will be job losses going forward due to this implementation of reciprocal tariffs, among other things. Also remember, there is also uncertainties surrounding the renewal of Africa's Growth and Opportunity Act, which is going to expire sometime in September this year. So we are not sure if that's going to be renewed. We also have challenges faced MCC projects. We are not sure if that's going to be on hold for how long, among other things. So these are all going to lead to fiscal pressures in the medium run. Indirect effects obviously are going to come from our big brother, South Africa. They are also hit by 30% tariff. Obviously, it is going to affect our remittances as well going forward because we have a lot of people working in South Africa. So the heightened global uncertainties calls for bold fiscal reforms. So in this level, I will leave the floor to my colleague, Sonia, to present the reforms that we think will drive fiscal policy into inclusive growth. Thank you so much.
Good morning. It is a pleasure to be here today to discuss with you how to improve fiscal policy in Lesotho. Okay. So Lesotho has enjoyed now 2 years of fiscal surpluses, owing to extraordinary SACU revenue and now this year also water royalties. Before these resources are spent, we need to make sure that they are well spent, they achieve the maximum that is possible. This means in terms of growth, but also that these objectives are achieved in the most efficient way possible so that we can make. So the World Bank has analyzed fiscal policy management in Lesotho, and we would like to share our thoughts with you today. And I have 3 main messages. The first one is that in Lesotho, spending is influenced by SACU revenues. These are volatile. So this means that they change frequently and quite significantly from year to year. In a good year, you have 50% of your revenues come from SACU, that's about 30% of GDP. In a bad year, they are slashed by half. What has been happening is that in these good years, there is a tendency to spend these revenues. And there are no savings or not adequate savings for bad times, for those years where SACU actually goes down by half of what they are in good years. So in the absence of fiscal buffers, what happens in these bad years is that it's difficult to adjust spending by half suddenly from one year to the next. There are commitments, there are public sector wages to pay, there are pensions to pay, there are goods and services to have the functioning of the public sector working properly. So what happens is that the little amount of buffers that exist, they go down, debt increases because the buffers are not enough, and sometimes this even gives rise to the emergence of arrears because Lesotho is not able to honor all its commitments that it had. It also, because of this increase in debt and increase in arrears, it also undermines the peg between the Maloti and the rand. Then the second observation is that there is ample scope to improve the allocation of spending. This means gearing spending in Lesotho towards more growth-enhancing areas, and we can point to. One is public investment, infrastructure in different areas, but also human capital. To do this, and not to count always with good SACU years, other areas need to be contained. And one of them is public sector wages, as I will show later on. And finally, we have discussed here today, both the governor and the minister, about efficiency of public spending. This means with the resources that we have, we spend them in the best way possible. So there are three areas of reform that can guarantee us this. One is in public investment management, the other is in public financial management, and the other is in public procurement. So now I'm going to show you some charts that illustrate these points. The first one is Lesotho is the bar in the middle, the highest bar. That shows you how fiscal policy is vital for Lesotho's development. Public spending is very high in terms of GDP compared to other countries. The region itself, which are the countries at the left, spending is also high, but is much higher than other parts of the world, which are on the right-hand side of the chart. Lesotho also spends a lot, if you look at the allocation, in what we call recurrent spending. This is what I said, is everything that is not public investment. It is public sector wages, is pensions, is transfers to other parts of the government, including state-owned enterprises. It is subsidies. And little is spent actually on public investment compared to the total amount of spending. So this is the point. The next chart illustrates the point that I made earlier about how volatile SACU revenues are. SACU revenues are the line, the red line. And then how much influence is the fiscal balance? So the fiscal balance is revenue minus spending. And what you see is that it fluctuates in tandem with SACU revenues. So now the lines are above zero. This means we have important, historically high SACU revenues, and we have a fiscal surplus. But in the years where SACU is low, you see that the green line, the fiscal balance, is actually negative. Here is another way to see the long-term impact of spending in Lesotho. So let's take first a look at the chart on the left-hand side. So we have the adjusted primary balance. That is the fiscal balance, revenues minus spending, minus what Lesotho pays in interest for its debt. And in the blue lines, you see what is observed. You go to the statistics, and this is the fiscal balance that is observed. You see that it's very volatile. So what we did, we extracted this volatility, and we focused on the trend, on the long-term trend. And the long-term trend tells you that Lesotho in the 90s is in a very comfortable situation in terms of fiscal policy, enjoying surpluses. And then over time, the situation deteriorates. And then especially after, a little bit earlier than 2010, actually, you see the decline in the fiscal balances and then going into a deficit. The chart on the right-hand side explains you why. So you see the bars, the blue bars. Lesotho is in a fiscal deficit most of the years, and especially most of the recent years, except the 2 last years. You see the red line, which is expenditures. They are above the orange line, which is revenue. So this explains the fiscal deficits. And this is happening more often in more fiscal years. This chart shows also what I said before, that Lesotho spends in good times, and then it doesn't have resources to keep spending at those levels during bad times. So this is what economists call pro-cyclical fiscal policy. So you're overspending in good times and not spending enough in bad times. We have run this analysis for all the countries in the world, and it results that Lesotho is pro-cyclical. And I remember the minister two years ago in a speech saying that the objective of fiscal policy was to move to counter-cyclical fiscal policy, to help the economy in bad times. So it happens that Lesotho is a new pro-cyclical country. And this means that you were counter-cyclical before. So it is a matter to look at the good practices in the past and actually correct course. Now I go to the second point that I made earlier on, which is on the allocation of spending between recurrent and public investment. So one of the areas to focus on under recurrent spending, and this is the one that it's more prominent in our analysis, is the fact that the public sector wages, they are very high in Lesotho. So the chart shows public sector wages in percentage of GDP for all sub-Saharan Africa, and you see that Lesotho's bar is right on the right-hand side. Here it shows that the public sector wage bill restricts spending in public investment and other growth enhancing areas. Why? If you take a look at the chart on the left-hand side, you see the light blue line is GDP, and you see spending and the wage bill above GDP. So this means that Lesotho is spending above the resources or the income that is creating in the economy. The dark blue line is expenditure, and you see that is really high compared with the dynamics of GDP, the income that is being generated in Lesotho. And then you see in more recent years the pressure that the wage bill is putting on that expenditure because it is above the line of expenditures. The right-hand side chart is just another way of illustrating what I've said before. The public sector wage bill exceeds peer countries in different metrics. Okay, so in terms of percentage of GDP, Lesotho is the country with the red column. In terms of current expenditures, and also in terms of tax revenues. If Lesotho didn't have SACU revenues and water royalties to spend, we would be spending above 80% of its tax revenues, of all its revenues, on public sector wages. This leaves little space for anything else. This is another point is actually doesn't come from us, so we don't take ownership. It's actually an IMF analysis that looks at the public sector wage premium. The public sector wage premium is just illustrating how much public sector wages are above private sector wages, okay? So in Lesotho, you see that compared to the region, and I recall the salaries in the region were already on the high side compared to the world distribution, they are 64% higher than in the private sector. Now, you can imagine a firm that wants to actually hire a worker, and he has to compete with the wages of the public sector. It's even a bit more complex and more worrying when you look at this wage premium, this differential, divided by levels of education. And it is higher for low levels of education, okay? So for no education or primary level education. This means that it's also very difficult to hire for a person. Now, think about a person not as the employer, but for a person, if he doesn't have a job in the public sector, looking at the public sector as the reference wage, and then considering having a job in the private sector. So the incentives are not aligned. So I would like to conclude with a few areas where Lesotho could reform to increase the effectiveness of fiscal policy and transform it into an engine of inclusive growth. The first is to break this cycle between SACU revenues and public spending. And there are two policies that could be implemented. One is adopt fiscal rules. They will allow you to unlink SACU from spending. They will allow you to put a brake on that, on the growth of public debt, and you can also use them to help with budgetary allocation by looking into expenditure rule that, for example, can tackle the growth of public sector wages. And to lock these additional revenues that Lesotho has been benefiting in these past 2 years, Lesotho could establish a stabilization fund. This is the buffers that could be deployed in bad times, and at the same time strengthen the reserves to strengthen the currency peg. The second area of reforms deal with improving the allocation of spending. So this is about allowing for a greater share of the budget to be spent on investment, but also on education. And here we make the point that it's not about wages, it's about investing in facilities, investing in pedagogical equipment, in reducing the large urban and rural divides in Lesotho so that every child has the same opportunity to achieve high standards. This requires, of course, good quality data on public investment. That has been a challenge. But also to control for recurrent spending, in particular considering a reform of public sector wages. The report also looks into another area, which I have not referred here, but is important, which is the possibility to actually update and upgrade the beneficiary registry of all the age pensions. The public sector, the Ministry of Finance and Development Planning, has made wonderful work in actually eliminating from the payroll the ghost public sector workers and ghost public sector pensioners. This is about continuing and extending a reform that is already in place to achieve more savings. And finally, the third area is about enhancing the efficiency of public spending through these reforms to make sure that public investment management is really at the service of increasing the effectiveness of public investment spending, and it is more linked to growth. How this can be done? Well, first, by actually aligning project prioritization with the National Strategic Development Plan. Minimizing the costs at project appraisal, it's very costly independently of the amount of the public investment. Reinforce monitoring and control, you need good data for that. And reorient the funds to the projects that are performing well. and restructure or close the ones that are not performing well. Improve the PFM. This is public financial management. We would like to perhaps just focus on the implementation of the Reform Action Plan from the PIFA assessment that was published, I believe, in the month of February. There is a plan of action there, implement it swiftly, reinforce the use of IFMIs, and implement a Treasury single account to make sure that you monitor and control well the spending of the public sector. And finally, this is another reform that is ongoing. Lesotho implemented the Public Procurement Act in 2023, but some regulations are still pending, and especially the Public Procurement Regulatory Authority that will guarantee an independent appraisal of public procurement. This is very important. So Lesotho has now a unique opportunity and the conditions to build a new foundation for robust and inclusive growth. So let's get to work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Sonia. We are going to take a break. We'll take a tea break right now. But before we go for the tea break, we'd like to take a group picture. So we're going to request my minister and I think the ministers who are still in the house. Okay. Okay. Ndate Governor, you are still here?
Yes.
Yes, she's here. I wanted to know whether they will not leave soon. Okay. Oh, thank you. Then it's fine. Can we take the tea break? We are going to have our tea just outside here. We are going to take 15 minutes, a 15 minutes break. So this will be kind of quick. Thank you very much.
So my head is going to
Can we settle down? May we kindly settle down? Welcome back from the tea break. Welcome back from the tea break. We are going to go into a panel discussion. We are going to go into a panel discussion, and after this panel discussion, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions. So if you have any questions, you can just jot them down. We might be able to answer all of them, but as we go into the questions and answers session, remember that we're still working on that time. This is that period where the report came early. Things happened last week. So let's try and focus. So as we go into the panel discussion, on our panel discussion, we are going to have two people. Dr. Tankatle Dima, who is the Director of Research, CBL. He's a Chief Economist and Director of Research at the Central Bank of Lesotho, where he also serves as a member and coordinator of the Monetary Policy Committee. He has over 20 years of experience in macroeconomic policy and leadership. He previously served as a senior advisor to the executive director at the IMF in Washington, D.C., representing 23 sub-Saharan African countries, including Lesotho. He holds a PhD in economics from the University of Cape Town, a master's degree from the University of Sheffield, UK, and a bachelor's degree from the National University of Lesotho. Ndade Tlelima, you're welcome, sir. And we also have Dr. Lesiko Maketa, who is the head of the Department of Economics, NUL. He's a senior lecturer in the Department of Economics at NUL, where he currently serves as a head of department. His research focuses on international economics, which he also teaches at NUL. He holds a PhD in economics from Peking University. In terms of advisory services, he's a member of various boards, including the African Economic Research Consortium and Basotho Enterprise Development Corporation. Additionally, he coordinates the World Trade Organization Chair Program at the National University of Lesotho. Dr. Maketa, you're welcome. Bondet, you are most welcome. I want to begin with you, Ndade Tlelima, and I'm going to ask you about Lesotho's monetary policy context. And the first question that I want you to address is, in the report actually highlights that the Central Bank of Lesotho has reduced the policy rate by a cumulative 50 basis points between November 2024 and February 2025. The rate was kept unchanged in the recent MPC sitting in March 2025. Given the recent easing in inflation, what are the implications for the CBL's ability to adopt a more accommodative monetary policy, given that the real policy rate is lower than South Africa's? And what are the channels through which it can help to sustain economic activity?
Thank you very much, Mayor Kwadza. I also wish to align myself by thanking the delegates and participants for this important occasion. Since I have both the minister and the governor in the room, I'm free to speak my mind and they can straighten the facts. Okay. So, context. In the global scheme of things, South Africa is a small open economy. In the global scheme of things, South Africa is a small open economy. But when you compare Lesotho's economy with South Africa, we are a very, very small open economy, which is largely dependent on a lot of things that are happening in South Africa. So in terms of the context, I wanted to start with that point. The most important point to reflect on for Lesotho's monetary policy decision-making process is the fact that Lesotho, most of the delegates will know this fact here. Lesotho operates under the Common Monetary Area, and under the CMA, Lesotho's currency, the loot, is pegged to the South African rand. There are three things that economists call impossible trinity in economics: independent monetary policy, fixed exchange rate, and free movement of capital. Now, in Lesotho, under the CMA, there is free movement of capital within the CMA. And now we have a fixed exchange rate system, which means that we cannot have an independent monetary policy. So that context is very important, because whatever deviations the governor and his team may want to do should not be materially far from what is happening in South Africa. Therefore, the CBL's ability, even despite easing inflation, to move away, far away from the South African policy stance is limited by the CMA to avoid free movement of capital in order to be able to maintain the level of reserves at an adequate level. Now, the inflation we saw recently, inflation has been easing because of the slowdown in price increases of goods, of food and fuel, which are very important for Lesotho's economy. But what you see now is that the real rate in Lesotho is lower than that in South Africa, which raises a risk. If our interest rates are much lower than rates in South Africa, people or economic agents, companies may start taking the money out of the economy, and this can put the level of reserves for the CBL in danger. So the calibration of monetary policy by the CBL should be fairly cautious in that regard. I think I have answered your question.
Yes, Ndate. Thank you so much. But I want to ask you another one. Lesotho has been grappling with low credit to the non-financial private sector, which hampers entrepreneurship and private sector-led growth. The central bank has put a lot of effort to improve the credit conditions for businesses. What is your assessment of the root causes, and what could be done to improve credit conditions to the private sector? As we just heard that the private sector is supposed to be the one that leads us out of where we are.
Thank you, Megwas. This is one of those questions that I'm more than happy to leave in the hands of the governor and the minister. But to do justice to my part being part of the panel here, let me just say the following remarks. When you look at, it is true that credit in Lesotho is much more subdued compared to Lesotho's peers, even within the CMA. When you look at all the CMA member countries, which include Lesotho, Eswatini, Namibia, and South Africa, maybe you can leave out South Africa. Even if you compare Lesotho with Namibia and Eswatini, the ratio of credit or credit extension, the way we measure it, the ratio of credit to deposit, in other words, how much credit in the economy is extended as a share of the total deposits in the banking system is the lowest. And I'm going to superimpose two other facts. When you look at the lending rates in Lesotho, the lending rate happened to be the highest. But when you look at the deposit rates, our deposit rates are very low. What explains that? The explanation to that is very clearly the level of liquidity in the system. When our banking sector is very highly liquid, so the economy, in a structural sense, has excess liquidity. There's a lot of money in the system, which is not necessarily going into credit. And I may want to leave out the reasons for that. I saw some of my bosses, banking CEOs here, before they crucify me. I'm going to leave them to explain why it is, what makes Lesotho different from Eswatini in terms of credit risk. And then I can leave the other one probably with the minister and the governor. What is it that we are doing in terms of policy, which is different from the other countries? Clearly, there is something that is not happening. If you are looking within the CMA, we are the lowest, and yet our banking sector is by far the most profitable of those, or significantly more profitable than the rest. So clearly there are structural issues, which I cannot do justice to in terms of simply responding with an answer straight away, unless we have 2 hours to discuss.
No, we don't. Not today, Ndate. Thank you so much, Ndate. Then I move to you, Dr. Makhet. The report notes that the private sector engine of growth is not working properly, and this is negatively impacting job opportunities, productivity growth, and exports, which could provide more foreign revenue. What are the main areas of opportunities, and what policy actions could help strive for a more vibrant private business sector?
Okay, thank you, Mayor Kwasa. I was actually expecting a question related to academia, not on the private sector. It's a long statement, and then it's also a very good question in it. So I'm going to break it down and make it easy so that you all understand the question, then we can appreciate the discussions. So the question basically is, our private sector is struggling, and what can we do to fix it? I think that is the long and short of the question. So now, to answer the question, I want us to imagine a Lesotho where our young people don't have to leave to South Africa to find jobs, where our economy does not have to wait for SACU revenues to survive, and also where our businesses, our private sector, are not struggling under the limited funds, red tape, and bureaucracy. Now, if you can think about those questions, then the next, if you can have that imagination, the next question would then be, why are we not there yet as the private sector in the country? So we need to understand some of the harsh realities that we have in the economy that are confronting the private sector. I think mine is just the summary of what has been discussed here. So one is, our private sector is riddled with limited access to finance. I think that's one thing that have been discussed in the presentation here. The second riddle is bureaucracy in starting the business. It is true that there's been some strides done by the Ministry of Trade. I think now to register a company, it's about 3 days or so. But when you compare that with other nations, African countries, take for instance Rwanda, they take about just 24 hours. So it talks a lot about the ease of doing business in the country comparatively. It means that comparatively we're not there yet. Now the other thing is the weak value chains It's not easy. So there's a weak link in value chains between the industries and sectors. For instance, it's not easy for a local farmer to supply the local industries. And for that reason, our local industries are not competitive. The other thing is now the limited diversification. As we are all aware, we mainly rely on SACU revenues. We also rely on textile sector. So now we need to go and think beyond SACU revenues and the textile sector when you think about the private sector. And the last thing I want to talk about is the skill mismatch. Our graduates cannot find jobs, and the private sector needs skill-ready graduates. So those are some of the biggest problems that we have in the private sector. So that addresses the first question: why is our private sector struggling? Now the second part of the question is, what can we do to fix it? So now, in line with the challenges that I just articulated here, I think the first solution we have would be to unlock access to finance. It is true again that already we have the partial credit guarantee scheme in the country, but it needs to be strengthened, particularly for female people who are in the private sector. Let's take, for instance, the case of Rwanda again. They have the Business Development Fund. That fund has been able to help and strengthen about more than 200,000 businesses, small businesses in Rwanda. But in our case, to actually access credit from the bank is really hard. The banks need a higher collateral. It's really hard for a small business person to actually have that kind of collateral that is required by the banks. So access to credit needs to be strengthened for the private sector to thrive. The second thing is, I talked about the linkages in the value chains. It must be made easy for the local farmers in the agricultural sector to supply our industries. For instance, if we have farmers that are producing cotton, for instance, wool, for instance, it must be made easy for them to supply our textile industries. Otherwise, it means that we'll keep on relying on the inputs from South Africa. So it means that unless we strengthen these linkages, we'll keep on importing from South Africa. And as we can see now, we cannot really rely on the external economy. So we need to improve and strengthen our own local linkages across the sectors and also across the sectors. Perhaps the other thing I want to talk about is, I think I already mentioned that we need to cut the cost of doing business in the country in terms of bureaucracy, red tape. If you're going to compete with other businesses, if you're going to attract the foreign investors, the ease of doing business should be done seamlessly. Because we are not just operating as a nation in isolation. Because of the African Continental Free Trade Area, for instance, we are in competition with Rwanda, South Africa, Botswana, and many more other African countries. And if it can be easy for them to register a business, to start a business, the investors, the foreign investors, would rather go to those countries. So I think those are some of the logistics that we need to work on as a nation. So we also need to diversify beyond AGOA, for instance, also beyond our textile, AGOA and textile, and other sectors that could be competing in the economy. So the last thing that I want to talk about, I mentioned that skills, I think, is one limiting factor in our country. So we need to close that gap of skill mismatch. How do we do that? I think the best way to do that is to train for the existing jobs before we can think beyond the existing jobs. So we can do that through vocational training, but it also needs to be very intensive. And we need to make sure that it actually addresses the current problems that we have. And it's also targeting the existing jobs. So I think with that, Mayor Kwaza, I would want to end here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ndate. I want to ask you another question. Let's look at the public sector engine of growth. How can Lesotho's fiscal policy be reformed to better support inclusive growth and reduce poverty, given the current challenges, especially the current socio-economic challenges?
Okay. So I think this is also about Dr. Seleteng and Dr. Sonia's presentation. So for us also to appreciate the discussions and really understand where the direction of the discussions, we should understand a few socials that we have, socio-economic problems that we have in the economy. One is limited jobs, so creation of jobs. Also, we need to reduce poverty. So now, if we understand those key problems, I think now the question is, how can we reform our fiscal policy to address the issue of job creation and therefore eliminating poverty in Lesotho? I think the question boils down to that, so we all understand the question easily, and then we can engage in discussions. So also I think the thing for us to be able to address those questions, we must also understand and appreciate the harsh realities facing our economy. As it stands now, we are an economy that is consuming more than we are producing. That's one fact about our economy. And as we have seen from the presentations, about 50% or so of the government revenue goes into the public sector wage bill. And also we have seen that about 40% or so of the government budget relies on SACU revenues. So now the problem with that is that it leaves now the key sectors with just limited resources. When I talk about the key sectors here, I'm talking about the sectors that can actually grow the economy. Such sectors, for instance, are the infrastructure. We have education, for instance. Infrastructure and education. So it means there's just little allocation for those key sectors. Now, I think with that, the question would be, what would be the way forward now? So the way forward would have to have a smart spending from the government. We need to have a smart spending. We need to invest on what grows the economy. We need to invest in infrastructure. Infrastructure is the backbone of any economy. Education is also a backbone of the economy. So it therefore means that we have to redirect our spending from the recurrent wage bill, public wage bill, now into infrastructure. When I talk about infrastructure, I'm talking about both hard infrastructure as well as the soft infrastructure. The hard infrastructure we all know, and we've seen the strides in the economy, for instance, road infrastructure. But now the soft infrastructure is another key element. That's when we talk about access to electricity that is reliable. That's when you talk about efficient telecommunication networks. That's when you talk now about water, availability of clean water for industries. So that's one way we can, so how we want to spend smartly. The other thing is we need to expand our revenue collection. If we're going to be honest with ourselves, you can just look at the number of mikuku. What is mikuku in English? Shacks, yeah. If you look at the number of, if you just look at the shacks that we have, just drive from the town here, perhaps to Masiano again. The kind of shacks that we have, in terms of size, also in terms of profitability, so they are regarded to be informal sector. So it means they are immune to tax. But when you look at their size and also profitability, you start to realize that they make more profit, even some of the small businesses that are in the formal sector, that are paying taxes. So in a way, I think that when we reform our fiscal sector, our fiscal policy, it should informalize the informal sector for it to broaden its tax base. The other thing is smart subsidy. I know this is politically threatening, but the studies, the literature shows that if you talk about subsidies, for instance, we have the cash transfers, maybe the, sort of things like cash transfers. They cut across the poor and the wealthy alike. So I think it's about time now we think how we can actually have intended targets. We have targeted transfers, for instance. The subsidies should just mainly focus on the poor, because the social problems that you talk about here is reducing poverty. And it shouldn't just be umbrella subsidy for both wealthy and the poor. So I think it needs to be targeted. The last thing that I want to talk about also would be the decentralization of the fiscal policy. Most of our national budgets, for instance, are done centrally. So that has a limiting factor on the local government. And that's where these socio-economic problems are exacerbated. So I think it would be better to now trickle down to decentralize the budgeting, to make sure that the impact is actually seen at the very low grassroots, in the locals. And then there must be some sort of monitoring, some sort of performance-based pay, for instance, but something that will make sure that there is actually some performance that is constantly monitored. So with that, I would want to end here. Thank you.
Thank you, Bondete. I think now I'm going to open the floor for questions and answers. And the first hand that has gone up, even before I finish, is the governor's hand.
Thank you very much, Mewata. I'm not going to ask a question, but I just want to give some bit of perspective on the Lesotho economy and how I see it probably moving forward again. The literature, of course, I wasn't there at the time. In 1863, when you look at the city economy and try to understand who we were and how we have been, we realized that Lesotho was a granary of South Africa. With very good numbers, Lesotho is able to produce, to send its produce to Free State, even to Cape Town. And clearly it's a very nice economy. At a time now with exports very huge and imports very low from the South African side. And that was around 1863, when you look at your you are pursued from a long time ago. In 1930 exactly, the whole structure of the economy changed. Now, a lot of miners by now begin to go into South African mines. By 1930s, the preference of consumers in the economy started changing again for imported goods. And that preference changing came along up to today, where you see the middle class preferring the foreign produced goods than local goods. That itself was a complete shift in the structure of the Lesotho economy. And as a result, Lesotho started losing its competitive advantage. In the 90s, we tried to really bring in some textile industries from Asia in the economy to try to stimulate exports again and perhaps get back to where we were, but we wouldn't get that back again because the preferences now have changed entirely. At the same time, with that change of preferences, the education system as well was moving just along before realizing that the economy is going to go into trouble over a longer period of time. Now, the state-led enterprises, which started also in the 1960s, will then be privatized in the 90s. But that privatization also was never completed, was never managed. It was not managed in the sense that for those that remained in government, we did not enforce accountability. And I'll repeat that point. For those that remained not privatized, we did enforce accountability. We continued giving them subventions and otherwise without performance monitoring. That was a crisis. If we do that completely, you are completely shutting down this economy. Because they will continue, therefore, getting the fiscals from government's fiscal revenues, from government out of taxation, yet their performance is going under continuously. And the privatizing agenda itself was never completed as well. It was halted, but even after halting it, then we don't enforce accountability. So these are the problems that remain with us, to say, look, preferences have changed, the public enterprises have remained, those that remain, we have ensured that they perform. So the fiscals are actually being milked down over a period of time. And that situation continued to the present time where we are today, where we are hit now by these shocks. It got complicated at a later stage, now with loss of political power. As many political parties came into play, and the policy became unstable entirely, it was no longer of interest by the government at the time to ensure that the economy develops. The most important thing is secure the return to office. And as we do that, then it becomes very difficult to do very far-reaching, difficult reforms because you are afraid of your return back again into government. And that is now cemented until the late 2000s and so on and so forth. And clearly, this has been a challenge where we are, but this needs us to sit down, refocus with the history in mind, and really look at these reforms again and ask a difficult question. How best can we implement these reforms while at the same time looking at the politics? That's why I said the issue of the political economy becomes very critical again here to understand, so that the reforms we made, they take into account both the political side, including the economic side. If the two can now, if we ignore one at the cost of the other one will fail also. Because you have volatility this side, you have volatility this side. So how do we ensure that our reforms take into account both policy side and the economic front? And then we can be able to stimulate growth moving forward again. So I think the colleagues are okay. I agree with the argument that that's okay. But the final issue is that I want to raise here is on the credit issues again. Yes, there is a lot of work that is being done now, even in terms of our access to foreign savings on exchange controls. We are trying to look back and reflect much harder to say, look, to what extent have these action controls affected us and incentives for foreign savings coming to Lesotho. And that is a policy reform that we are currently undertaking from the Central Bank with the Minister of Finance, who approved that we can actually reflect and look into that as well, because it is also constraining the foreign savings from coming into the economy as well. But finally, the last issue I want to really highlight is these trading arrangements, which I think the West, to some extent, is trying to fragment our trading arrangements. And I think we have to stand here and say, look, this is what we believed in, this is what we have done, it should be recognized as such. We have written to FATF, for instance, as governors in the last 2 weeks to say, FATF, we want you to recognize CMA as a block. You cannot disintegrate CMA, because it seems that as they were implementing the reforms, as we were being credit listed and so on and so forth, this was disintegrating the CMA. At the same time, right now, with this policy in Washington, it has largely disregarded the SACU as a block. It is actually pinning Lesotho to take it out, South Africa take out, Southern take it out. As they do so, that is dismantling that block entirely. And that is the block in which we have benefited as well over a longer period of time. So I think these are the issues that I just wanted to raise to say, look, let's reflect and more deeper and looking into political and economic issues as well as economic issues, and we can be able to craft a reform agenda moving forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ndede Governor. I see a hand. There were 2 hands, I think, this side. Okay, Ndede.
Okay, what I was going to say is a comment rather than a question. I'm Jim, I work at LNDC. So, in the previous discussion...
Just a minute, Ndade, can you also give us your name?
I'm Jim Malesela.
Okay.
I work at LNDC. In the previous discussions that were made, it was also highlighted that we need to address the access to finance. We also need to work on our character as the entrepreneurs. So the comment that I would like to make, given the circumstances that we are in as a country, is there is a serious mismatch between what is required and what we get. For example, the graduates that we have, most of them, when it comes to financial literacy, they are not there yet. Secondly, we have always been talking about banks not willing to grant us access to finance. But having a 10 years experience in the bank, the story is different. The banks have been given targets to lend us money. But the problem is the character of people being lent money. It's not the character that you lend money. This is to say, as a country, we need to refine our graduates. We need to teach our kids financial literacy from high school, university, so that by the time they come to the working environment, they are at par of what is required. I will make an example. The standards out there in the education, you take a kid of somebody who is passing at 40%, you say they proceed. You go to the bank, the balance sheet doesn't balance, you won't get a loan. So this is to say, we need business acumen from universities, because we have been working on a belief that banks don't want to grant us money. After I moved from the banks to LNDC, I tried to get into a discussion with banks. What is it that hinders you from lending money? The character of our entrepreneurs. And when you look at the default rate in all the 4 banks, you will find that they are at the level of SME. What does that tell you? It means the financial literacy that we need for these people to be operational, it's not where we want it. This says, as a country, we need to teach these people from high school, university. You can be a lawyer running a law firm. You need to have financial literacy. You can be a nurse. It shouldn't be a question of being left to economists or BCom students. It should be a general knowledge to everybody. So the character that we are talking about here, it's a problem. And this could lead to reckless lending if we push banks more without addressing the entrepreneurs themselves.
Thank you so much, Ndade. I know where I come from. We are trying to implement a course on financial literacy. But after what you've just said, it looks like it would be a waste because we have to start from primary school. Thank you, Ndade. Yes, Ndade.
Thank you, Madam, for this opportunity. I just have 2 points before I go to credit.
The name, the institution first.
Hello, it keeps going on and off. My name is Kau Matete. I am the managing director of one of the banks, main bank, Lesotho. I really want to start by appreciating information that was shared here. I told Dr. Secretary during the break that some of the stats on the graphs that he shared are really scary when you are looking into them, to an extent of being depressing. But we thank the program sharing all this data. So it's up to us, the minister said, whether we can be honest with us as the citizens and say what are the things that we can do. I often wonder why, whenever there's a project that has to happen, whether it's in the agri sector, Will and Mohan, it is always either CAFI or World Bank or IFAD. There has to be someone who starts something for us. Do we question ourselves and say, really, from us, the collective intellectual capabilities that we have in this country, we just pick up 1 or 2 projects that we can do, from looking at our plates in the morning or what we do before we come to work, whether it's so given. But can we seriously do something so that Manjara can is something that we are doing. Sorry for that, I was talking to us too, but I was just appreciating it at large. The second point I want to touch in passing, because it's been raised many times, is on access to credit. We often, as the banks, seem appear defensive when we get to this topic. But I can assure you that I am just a boy from Matebe who happens to head a banking institution. My interest in this country, I can't think any other way without thinking about developing the country. And for the first time, after many years, we actually have all the banks, all the 4 banks in Lesotho are headed by local Lesotho. So to think that our interests can be elsewhere, even if the capital comes from elsewhere, it's misplaced. We must be engaged and share and see ideas from our perspective. Dr. my eye on this issue of rules to deposit ratio that was also touched by the governor, that the central bank, a year or 2 years back, they came with almost a directive that says, you banks, you must lend to this extent, 70%, I think it's the figure that is given. None of the banks are anywhere close to that. When we knew that directive, the banks will still not get there. So we need to sit around, and one next was touched here, which is reforms. I think it's just one of the problem. But what we need to also look at is the structure of our economy and say how do we systematically change the structure so that it encourages or it spurs growth for the country. So as the banks, we are willing to learn the hill that I always see when I meet the regulators, you know this one, is that if, just for those who are not in the banking sector, if you look at, because we are deposit taking, we are regulated, we take deposits from the public and then we lend the same money. But if you look at the money that we get from individuals, you, people like me, you and you, we lend out far more than the money that we get from people. So it is not correct that the banks are sitting with deposits that they are not lending out. The problem is elsewhere. And that is what we need to discuss respectively with people who can come up with solutions and try to say how do we pave the way for as a country. So just on behalf of the, it's not just the bank that I work for, on behalf of all the 4 banks, trust me, we will not use deposits to chase 6% or 5% return when 12 plus percentage returns can be and elsewhere. We would like to go there. The problem is those such projects are few and far between, and when they come, they will not come in the manner in which the banks would like to. They become bankable because remember again, we are using the deposits, we are not using anybody's money. So we have to be responsible. So I'm saying it is really in our interest, all of us. There is nobody who just want to hold deposits and all the rest of that. Let's engage more, and then see how we can help each other to grow the economy.
Thank you, Ndade. I see another hand here, and another one at the back, and another one. Here. There are 2 at the front. Yes, Ndade.
I am wondering whether I'm the one with the mic, the only one. Thank you very much. My name is Mukito Khobutle. I am from the civil society organization. I am listening to presentations and discussions which are very, very, very fruitful. One thing that has always crossed my mind is to what extent our strategies and policies have taken into consideration or have integrated our cultural and social norms. The reason why I'm saying this is because there's a saying driven by the prophet. If you take your business in one of the locations and you find out that you are trying to provide a service or goods to people who are very poor, I will not be interested to go and establish my business there. Unless you are talking about the tenderpreneurship of these people who will actually focus on the government and get tenders. Believe me, we have to be honest to ourselves. This tenderpreneurship is a scam. It's not a private sector driven economy, it's a scam. When we talk about the real private sector, we really have to look at issues of the demand for services and products. That will attract the private sector. Otherwise, even if you are talking about the foreign investors, how will they come? Doing business in Lesotho, it's terrible. The demand for products and everything, really there's no demand. So the private sector is going to be very frustrated. Let's try to come up with some strategies, real strategies. The other thing is that we talk about the data. So much that in each and every presentation, the issue of lack of data is there. I ended up questioning. Now you are dealing with economists. Economists, when everything doesn't work, they will bring all the back of assumptions and run the model, and everything will come out. That's what I've seen economists does. And now we are talking about data. That data is really, really a problem. So I'm saying this is one area that we really have to, because we seem to misdiagnose the situation. Every time we come up with the same problems, we can go back to the literature, we have the same problem over and over. It's because the information that we are using, I suspect, is not adequate. It's not reflecting what is happening on the ground. So this is one area that we need to look into. The other issue that I think we are overlooking, we need to put it as a priority, is the corruption. Corruption, it will undermine our efforts for the development. Even if we come up with the best strategies, if we don't deal with corruption head on, we will not experience any development. Most of my issues were comments and not really questions. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you, Ndade Khobotle. I just have one question. You talked about the culture, that it actually plays a big role. I wanted to understand, in the context of the business people, what exactly did you mean, so that we know exactly what you are referring to? What type of culture hinders us as Basotho?
Okay, I never expected that this will be a dialogue, but but we have experience when we were promoting the tourism in the communities. We're trying to show these people how they can benefit from the visitors, and Basotho would go and tell you that, man, this is my moeti. How do you make moeti waka pay? That is the practice that is existing. And if you don't take care of that, we have already established some tourism sites somewhere in rural areas where we know that the tourists will pass there. We put these structures and say, this is how you're going to make money. Then these people, when we left, they say, these ones, they bring these things from the urban, and they think we live like that. Muituaka has to, I have to have tswekere. If I don't have tswekere, ngwanaka tsamaya lo nkadimela tswekere ha mmanyoman, we part. Tlo tla nokela muituaka mto. Muituaka una le dijana tsa hae, una le, that is the value they put. And now you bring the issue of money, it doesn't make sense to them. So I'm saying issues like that, if we don't consider them.
Thank you.
I was even thinking that if it banka, this is just a thought. How if it about kadime khomu, banka it and it makes more sense than Lisa Chaltaga Musuwa.
Thank you, Daddy. Thank you, Daddy. Hey, there was another hand. So far, I think we have had comments. We are almost rounding off. Mm-hmm.
Good afternoon. My name is Mathabo Mkoko. Thank you to the World Bank Group, the Honorable Minister, for this engaging conversation. For me, I just want to add a few inputs in terms of how do you take advantage of this crisis. Somebody always say, never make a good crisis go to waste. My simple thought is that it is time we come together to effectively focus on mobilizing domestic revenues. And with that, I think we should wholeheartedly stand together to protect our tax revenues, because these are so far, looking to be the most reliable source of revenue for this government, or simply put, for this public. Many times when you say this government, the message is not driven home properly. So, I'm also thinking we have been doing, through the support of World Bank, doing business indicators for Lesotho. And we all know these are some of the factors that makes us uncompetitive when we look into the global space. Perhaps our first target in relation to reforms could be looking out at some of the quick wins we can target for effectively transforming doing business in a most easy and efficient way for this economy. That will obviously require some restructuring of programs, but also some legislative reforms. Accordingly, it also says, from a legislative perspective, those reforms must be prioritized because this is where government meets the private sector. The reforms that are mostly targeted for driving this economy takes years and years on end to be legislated. That is negatively affecting any other efforts we could think of. And I want to imagine, having done that, prioritization for digitalization of those processes is key, because we can't imagine or continue to pretend that corruption doesn't happen. For purposes of making sure we are efficient and effective, to the extent possible, we must eliminate the human factor. I know there's a lot of work that Ndate Mukuku is doing through the support of the World Bank for the interoperability. That has to be accelerated so that we can make sure that in terms of making sure it's easy, it's fast, it's efficient, it's inclusive, we are able to do that. I think Dr. Makgetta spoke about something that is very fundamental in as far as this economy is concerned. We are largely driven by the informal sector. From the tax space, we are doing a lot of work to bring them into the tax net, but there's a lot of things that we have to do from different angles to make sure that they are supported to transform effectively the informal sector, maybe to semi-formalization, so that that is also counted for purposes of addressing the inefficiencies in the economy. I saw the reports that were done by the World Economics Forum late last year, in as far as the African economies are concerned, to that effect. And they could not be more spot on. And that is largely effective when we look at our informal sector. So if we can help them and support them somehow, that I want to imagine would help us address this crisis. Lastly, Dr. Letete mentioned something critical. Our strength as an economy lies very much in terms of the trade agreements we have made, particularly looking amongst others, the SACU, and I would even say the World Trade Organization. We have a crisis now that is affecting those relationships. But where are we as the partners in these relationships? You see now one country dealing with the US on its own. Could we ever win standing alone? Could we ever go to the US and Lesotho to present our case as a single factor that way? I doubt. And I want to imagine when a crisis like this one comes through, we have to stand together. The SACU must stand this case. The World Trade Organization must stand up and show up to address this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor. We actually, Ndate, I'll just give you 1 minute because we have actually come to the end of our discussion. Just 1 minute.
Oh, thank you very much, Mayor Kwatsa. My name is Spirit Tladi. I come from Lesotho Polytechnic. It's indeed an honor for me to be the last speaker because nobody will get to respond to my remarks. I have listened attentively to what people have been saying in this presentation. And I think one of the key issues which we haven't been emphasized is the issue of skills development. This is very, very key. It really doesn't matter how well planned or how well articulated the policies are. If you do not you don't have hands to implement the policy, nothing will get done. I'm very, very glad because during the presentation it was said that there has to be more investment towards education. And of course, we are glad that indeed the World Bank highlighted this. But we know that to a large extent it talks about basic education. We need to focus on tertiary education. We need to focus, like Ndate Maketa was saying, on technical and vocational education, because that is where you develop skills. This is why when you say that private sector does not have ready and skilled labor force, it is developed at the tertiary level. And I would like to know whether the policy emphasizes this, because if it's not, we're just going to have a very, very high literate population who cannot do anything but to read SMSs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ndate. I think that was the last comment, and it happens to have a question, and I will give it to because now he's talking about the policy. Does the policy on education say that? So I want to look this side for the answer. He wants to know whether the policy on education also recognizes the tertiary education as an engine of growth.
Okay, thank you. Let me just start with that first. Harashava, this document that we have before us, it emphasizes two things: enablement of the private sector and focus on human capital development as the two key things that it says we should focus on. And indeed, we are focusing on a myriad things. Sometimes, when I do the budget, I sometimes wish we could do it in a public forum so that you hear the myriad needs of this country and how every one of them, at least in the way that they are presented, compete for space within the resources that we have. And indeed, they are all important. It's education, it's health, it's issues of nutrition, stunting, and issues of HIV diseases and whatnot. Maternal mortality, gender-based violence, you name them. It's issues of justice, it's issues of agriculture, labor, all of them, vying for resources. But at the same time, knowing what you are preaching is that we should focus on growth, we should focus on jobs. growth in a way that it produces jobs. And you want to look into the productive sectors, but you also want to look into the catalytic factors, the enablers. So things like infrastructure, power, development of natural resources, water, and so forth. But my point was not there. The process of getting to focus as we are doing is not as easy as we think. It's very difficult, because even when you do focus, you can't leave the other sectors behind. At the same time, who have a bad foundation, primary education to tertiary level. So how do I focus on tertiary level and leave out the primary and secondary level? It's just not that easy. So the important thing is, I believe this country has people that are very literate. At one point we had the highest literacy rate in this region. Mona mohoting financial literacy at primary level. I agree totally. I started that program at the bank, and he's taking it forward. We partnered with the Department of Education to do that. I agree, because for as long as Kifumana Bato Ban Lezang, Barim making an investor in 500 billion. Now, why it's about $500 billion or high seed, but only Mutian about like local. It means we still have a problem. Kimanga to think actually Israel assets been now with and go. Anzabatla Wena, Korsha, Salabatana Wena Feder, Upilova High Bush, Fella Nachelegal. Sometimes keep puts on us Chavasira. Are we sick? Something is lacking in us. Somebody says we're not literate, but why am business in give us literacy, financial literacy, hence are we going to sit here and say, "Go fella, but why in school doing none of them. The households only unemployment don't feel like they can get into business. What are we saying about ourselves? I sometimes wish and think we cannot leave out SACU as we go to speak with the US. We do policy, our trade policy is a compromise. Our external tariff is a common one. Similarly, we can't leave the Republic of South Africa as the largest trade partner. We are engaging at all levels. We are engaging at SADC as well as at AU and with other regions as well. A big assignment to promote South-South trade. So there are alternatives, but we want to turn every stone that we can. But I have so many comments. Thank
you, Mayor.
Sometimes I get frustrated. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayor. This is very hot, as you can see, but we don't have a lot of time. And I think the majority were comments. So, Ndade, is there any burning issue that you want to address?
Okay, thank you so much. So, yes, I think most were just comments, but I want to address, though they were just comments made by Dr. Ledede and also by our Honorable Dr. Madlanyan in her opening remarks. I think they will generalize that perhaps this is the new order in the economic system. And I think Dr. Ledede has given us a very nice economic history of what has been happening in our developments as a nation. So now I just want to take it from there, that even though I'm just going to be general in my, because most are comments, I also want to give it that economic thought, Dr. Letete, that though you ended in 1930, I think the whole system actually, especially in development thinking, that is meant to address the private sector challenges, actually started in 1945 or so, after the World War II. If we could remember, that's when we all had almost the entire world has the disruption because of the World War II. And so I think most of the countries, even for African countries, Lesotho included, somewhere they saw that as an opportunity that we are all now going to start at equal footing. And that's where, like you said, we had the first school of thought. I think it's called structuralism school of thought. Now, the idea was actually to build now industries, to build the private sector. But I think what was missing there was that most of the African countries were so desperate to be at the level of most of the developed countries. They started to build industries that were so sophisticated for their skill, like we are talking about skill mismatch. That at the end of the day, those industries just became white elephants. We couldn't operate those industries. And hence why in around 1960s, I think 1970s, it became very questionable whether the structuralism can actually revive our private sector. That's why we had now the current neoliberalism, where they actually took out completely the government from the market, because the first thinking was for the government to drive the economy. Now, with that also, it came with its own challenges, mostly for African countries. I think from 1960s, 1970s, that's when I think we started to hear the term, waste, 10 years, waste something, yeah, waste decade, I think, something like that. A lost decade, yes, the lost decade. Because there was still that thing that even the neoliberalism, where we are saying that it's a laissez-faire market system, there's no government, so through the invisible hand, the market will be able to efficiently allocate resources, but it's still failing. So like the Honorable Minister, Dr. Matlanyane is saying, perhaps this is the new order. And we really need to think about how are we going to build our industries. I think the Trump policies are only speeding up that process, but it's bound to happen. So I think we need to think about industries. We need to think about the role of the state. We need to think about the role of the market, of the private sector itself. Because there's also an argument that says that the development of any economy is embedded in its endowment resource structure. So what it means is that what we have as a nation will actually give us the comparative advantage in the global market instead of just relying on the external market. But I think that says that this is about time we really think about the role of each and every one of us in this system. Thank you.
Thank you, Ndate. Ndate Tladima.
Madam, I'm going to speak in less than 2 minutes. I wanted to leave two mainly comments to the team. The minister and the governor can see they have a big challenge on behalf of the government. We need a forum where we can sit down and agree on what to implement and when. We have far too much written already about Lesotho. Ndadema has a valid point. Banks take our money and they lend it out, and therefore they need people who can repay the money. So that process of financial intermediation. In other words, the problem cannot be pinned on the financial sector alone. This is an economy-wide problem. Number two, which is more important, the point I wanted to make. So I want to leave this congregation with this thought. Lesotho has not been growing. It's an economy which does not have a meaningful private sector. It depends very heavily on the government and other external factors. And the government itself depends largely on external sources of revenue, i.e. SACU. And we have had structural problems in Lesotho. I've been working with the bank for close to 30 years now. Each and every year, the IMF will come up with what they call Article 4 report. The challenges for Lesotho are almost the same. So here's a question. What is it that we need to do as a country to get out of the issues instead of perpetually talking about these issues? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ndate. I think all in all, what I picked, just one, is we need to work on our character. As it was said, it looks like everything points back to us as individuals, as the private sector, as Basotho individuals. We are the ones to solve the problem. So thank you, Bondate. Thank you, Bondate Lebomme, who actually commented. Thank you very much. As we round off, we are behind time, but I think the discussions were worth it. I would like to call upon Dr. Mako from the World Bank to come and give the concluding remarks. Welcome, sir.
Dumelang. Thank you very much again for all of you for being here. I'm not sure if the microphone can pick up my voice. We have been discussing all morning. I'm really honored to be here. This is the first ever Lesotho economic update for the World Bank, and it is coming at a time that I think all of us will consider quite challenging. We have been discussing prospects, and there have been many words that I've heard repeatedly over the course of the morning, right? So I cannot do justice to all of the discussions. It's going to be very difficult to summarize, right? So I think we can do a quick exercise and summarize it together, right? So let me ask you a question. Raise your left hand if you think that economic prospects in Lesotho are concerning. Now you can keep it up, and let me ask you another question. Raise your right hand if you truly believe that now is the time to act and do things that are hard to do but necessary. So there you go. That's the summary of the discussion, right? You know, when the team prepared this report, and I want to thank Sonia, I want to thank Monahan, I want to thank the entire team that has worked on this report. You know, one of the things that were coming up constantly in the conversations was on how important it was to transform fiscal policy in Lesotho. And everyone knows that to transform something, it cannot be done just by changing a few things here and there, right? You need to really think hard and try to change things from the ground up, right? And words like urgency and risks and, you know, needs and so forth, you know, we're coming over and over again, you know, and all of you have heard the specific options that have been proposed, right, in order to make that transformation. I think that the context globally and of course here in the sub-region really points to an even greater sense of urgency, right? So going forward, Lesotho will be hit very hard. And it's sombering to say, but prospects on growth, on employment, what's going to happen with remittances that are coming mostly from South Africa, another country that is very hard hit by the heightened global uncertainty, I think really points only to one direction, right? There are these three big pathways to transform fiscal policy that I hope all of you have the chance to read it in much more detail when you take a look at the report. And at any point, if you would like to engage with us and ask us any questions or ask us to share the data, we will be very happy to do all of that. But in addition to that, I want to also highlight that in addition to those three pathways that were presented already, right, about the need to have credible and transparent fiscal rules, for example, right, that would be able to make, of course, Lesotho save during good times and use those savings during bad times. The improvement of the allocation of spending to make sure that the money that is actually spent is going to its intended beneficiaries, right? And at the same time, fixing the systems, right, that will ensure that every single dollar that is spent is actually spent in the most efficient manner. But in addition to those things, we also know that the world has changed, and in a very short amount of time. And Lesotho has faced crisis before. So we know the difficulty of the impacts that are about to come, right? What's going to happen with the textile sector? I am sure that many of you know people that work in that sector, and that sector was already heavily affected even before the news from last week, right? So fiscal policy can also help us to absorb the shocks, but we know that the resources that we have are not going to be there forever, and right now we do have some resources, and those need to be spent in the most efficient manner, right? So when someone is shocked, we're panicking for a few seconds, right? I think the ability to take a deep breath and to take the first step and then take the second, it's really what is going to pull someone out of that particular shock, right? And I think that's exactly what we need to do. Often we discuss, after having a big meal or something enjoyable, right? So tomorrow I'm going to be doing things differently, right? Or, tomorrow will be the day that I go to the gym. Why not today? And with all of this, there was one point that the Honorable Minister highlighted several times, which is the importance of focusing on growth, not only for more jobs, but also for better jobs. But that doesn't happen in a vacuum. There are many things that need to be done. We're in this together, right? And the World Bank would always be available to help, to have conversations, to try to speak quite candidly as well, especially when we believe that things could be done differently or better, but always together. And in that sense, I just want to end by thanking all of you for being here. We look forward to the continuous conversations. We look forward to actually having these closed-door discussions to actually, agree on what can be done immediately and take, of course, Lesotho to a completely different path of development. So with that, Ke Aleboha, thank you very much.
Bommele Bondate, thank you so much for being here and for participating heartily. Now we have come to the end of the session and we are going to go over for lunch. Lunch will be served in the restaurant next to the casino. Enjoy your meal. Thank you so much.